little child, never they were five. And Mama said his words, oh, so many times. I'm thinking you knew better than the other guys, riding on backbiting and get away with lies. No matter what it takes, always gonna cry. The only thing that matters is you get what you decide. But I know for sure today will come when you first realize what you have done, and you finally get your debt repaid and your vengeance up.
Hello, people of the internet, people of the world, people of New York. Special welcome to our New Yorkers here. If you're here, let us know you're here by talking in the comments. We'll listen to you all night. We'll answer your questions throughout the talk. Let us know what brings you here today. What do you do in the biz? Where are you from? We want to know all those things. For those of you who are new to this, we are Blackmagic Collective. We're a collective of film and TV artists and crew. We meet regularly on the business and craft with education events that focus on the tech side. Membership is free. And it's so just go join. Go to blackmagiccollective.com. Join. Click your branch if you're in New York, Atlanta, Austin, New England, whoever else we've got going on, and of course around the world. And I want to introduce you now. Welcome to your brand new New York City chapter. And these are your hosts. We have Lily Kleinman and Grace Novak. Yay! They are going to be the faces you're going to see every time you have an event, until they get, I don't know, too tired of being on camera or want to give the reins away. They will be your hosts. They will be bringing you awesome events. You can get in touch with them via their social media handles and tell them things you want to see and people you'd like them to try to reach out and get, and they will do it. So welcome to the collective and welcome your chapter, ladies.
Thank you.
So I would love to just really quick before we let you jump into why we're here tonight, just let the audience get to know you a little bit. So Lily, might want you maybe start with a little bit about you. What do you do in the biz, and what is it like working in New York right now?
Awesome. Well, yeah, we were just talking about how like we're in these small spaces, but it's the New York chapter, so everyone will understand. I'm in Bed-Stuy. I'm located in Brooklyn with my fiance and my dog, and I'm working completely remotely, and I have been since March. I work as an assistant editor and an editor at a post house in New York. Right now I'm at Wax.
That's awesome. Grace, do you work with Lily, or are you just like always around each other?
We actually started at the same commercial post house together. I work at a different place now. I work at Big Sky Edit, but we both work in commercials. So, we chat shop, I guess you would say. We also went to grad school together, which is where we met. And we're just good friends. So I'm also an assistant editor and staff at Big Sky.
I think I met you guys at a Blackmagic design dinner in Vegas one year. And Terry was bragging on how wonderful of editors you guys were and how quick you were, just sitting in a hole in a room, like you made it sound there was like a hole somewhere at NAB and you just sat in it editing all day.
That's true. There is a hole.
I love it. I love it. So really, I want to hand this off because I want you to get to the topic. Also, Trip Langley from Hell's Kitchen. Thanks for saying hello. Anybody else here, please say hello. We love to hear from you throughout. We love to ask your questions. And if you want to give snarky comments, you're New Yorkers. You're allowed to do that. I'm going to head out of here. But before we do, I want to remind everybody that the Blackmagic Collective Film Festival submissions are now open. And every month we pick a new film as the pick of the month, all the way through November. And in November, we have our finalists, and they win huge prizes. Last year's grand finalists won a Ursa G2, a Sigma lens, $1,000 cash. Like it was, everybody who was involved just had a great time and loved it. And it was great exposure, even though we were all stuck inside in a pandemic. But Hopefully we're back live again this year in November, and we'll see you in Los Angeles here for that. Lily, can I kick it over to you to thank our sponsors?
Yes, we have to give a super special thank you to our sponsor, Blackmagic Design. And if you don't know Blackmagic Design, you have to know them because they're sponsoring this event. And they're a rare company that just absolutely loves filmmakers. And they make all of this possible for free, which is insane and amazing. And check them out. And thank you. Special thank you to them.
And if anyone has any questions, you can put them in the Q&A box or in the chat, and we'll try to answer as many as we can along the way. Hopefully, have some time for questions at the end for our guests.
Yes, yes, yes. So have fun. It's a party. It's like getting to have a conversation over wine or coffee or whatever, but with everybody watching. So I'm really excited that you guys are part of Blackmagic Collective now. I cannot wait to see what events you bring forward as we move ahead. And I'm going to wish you good luck tonight. Have fun.
Thank you,
Awesome.
Jen.
Thank you, Jen. So tonight we're going to talk to you about post-production jobs that you might not know about. And right before we got on here, Grace and I were talking about how, especially since we've all been remote, post-production jobs have been so incredibly valuable. And post people are kind of really the only people that I knew that were working at the start of this pandemic. So post jobs are where it's at. So Grace, do you want to introduce our guests?
Production. Jerome has been working in film for over 25 years. He's had experience in many positions, like as an editor, post-production supervisor, and a colorist. And then Carl started his career as an environmental artist in video games, which is super cool. And he's since worked in commercials and in film and television products, as in VFX and in supervising. So we're going to talk to them all about some of the jobs that they've done that you might not know about, and maybe you want to learn about and want to get into, because I think that's a super interesting thing to talk about. So let's do it. So Jerome, if we could start with you, could you tell us maybe, one of the jobs you've done and that you think people don't know about, and maybe talk to us a little bit about what it is?
Yeah. Well, one of the jobs that, one of the first jobs I ever did in post-production is actually technically more of a production job. And it was a great first post-production job because it involved working on set as a video assist operator. And some people will know what that means. For others, it was the job, or it is the job, when you're shooting a film camera on set, you actually need a video camera tapped inside of the film camera in order to be able to see the image that's being recorded. So basically your job on set is just to transmit the video to the director, to the clients, and record it. Very similar to what a DIT does. But the difference in terms of video assist back in the day, particularly with film cameras, is that you were basically recording what you wouldn't be able to see otherwise, because of course film requires that you develop it, process it, transfer it, and all that good stuff. So it was a great way to get started, because you're there from when the first light goes up all the way through the end of the shoot. I got to work on movies. I got to work on a bunch of Prince music videos. I got to work on the set of a lot of sort of technically elaborate commercials. It was a really great intro just to see how production gets set up from start to finish. So it was really invaluable in sort of helping me understand production and post-production.
That's awesome. Carl, do you want to talk about similar thing? Like, what do you think one of the jobs you did that people don't know about?
I think one thing that we do a lot these days that people probably take for granted, unless they're watching making of videos and all that kind of stuff, is what we call period cleanup. So times when you're shooting a movie that takes place in the past, and for whatever reason, legal reasons, logistical things, there's things that are obviously modern in the shot. And different shows have different tolerances for how accurate they want those things to be. But for example, I worked on the show The Deuce for HBO, and they were very, very detail oriented about their historical accuracy. The fact that we did many rounds of designing walk, don't walk signs to be specific to like that 1973 or whatever, where they weren't plastic yet, but it was a specific kind of glass, all these kinds of things. And so there's a lot of work that we do in VFX to affect those kinds of things, where it's, painting out air conditioners because it's supposed to be the 50s, or, removing neon signs because it predates that, stuff like that. Or one fun one was removing the handicap ramps from sidewalks, which was an interesting challenge because we had people walking right through those. So,
Are these the people that would also like erase the water bottles from the set of like Game of Thrones and stuff, or the coffee cups? I remember when that was a big conversation.
Yep, I've had non-actor people in the background who pull out a cell phone when it's supposed to be the 60s, things like that, which are annoying to clean up, but an interesting part of the job.
Definitely an important job.
Yeah.
Totally. Because that is a job on set, right? The script supervisor, but if the script supervisor misses it, then it's your job to fix it in post, isn't it? So you, Carl, have done a lot of VFX supervision, and Jerome, you've done a lot of post supervision. So for those of us who don't know exactly what that entails, can you define that job? And let's start with Carl and then go to Jerome.
Well, as a VFX supervisor, there's kind of two different sides to it, and I do both. Some people focus on one or the other. There's the on-set supervision, and then there's supervising the artists at the post-production shop. And on-set, which Jerome has plenty of experience with as well, you're dealing with planning whatever visual effects shots are going to be required, working with the different departments, whether it's stunts or practical effects or art department, to make sure that everything's prepared, and then being there when they actually shoot the plates for whatever effect you need, and sometimes capturing camera data, recording sizes and distances, either of the set itself or to the actors, and working with the camera team to make sure that everything's shot properly. Then the other side is, weeks or months later at the visual effects house, when you actually get those plates in, and working with the artists to achieve the effect based on those early prep discussions and talking with clients, and working through things like formats and resolutions and dailies workflows, and getting things into the edit, working with the editors to make sure you're working in the right ranges, all those kinds of things. So yeah, they're two very different jobs, but like I said, I do both of those. But I know people who focus only on set or only in the shop.
Right.
So post supervisor, post supervision has a lot in common with VFX supervision, right? It's concerned with the entire media pipeline, right? From acquisition, from shoot to delivery. So a good post supervisor really understands technically what every step entails. What was acquired on set, what needed to be transcoded for an edit, what formats need to go between an edit and finish, and then very importantly, what formats get delivered and all of that. But the technical pipeline is as important as that is. The most important part is communication between all of the people who are in each of those steps. So that's really, post supervision is really about communicating between the different entities that are shepherding the very precious media and story that goes along from start to finish. And for me personally, I've always worked as a post supervisor when I'm attached to the project, usually in some other way that's kind of meaningful to me as a colorist often, as a producer sometimes. And for me, having a stake in the project beyond just being a hired post soup, not that there's anything wrong with that, is that makes it more, it just makes it more likely that I'm sort of just in tune with the entire project.
Totally. Yeah. I think it's really interesting that both of you as supervisors have had experience doing some of the jobs that you have to supervise or communicate between. So I'm curious, how much of that do you think is necessary in being a supervisor? Do you think, I know Carl, you mentioned you started doing VFX and you are a CG artist. And Jerome, you've been involved in the entire post process, it sounds like, and very heavy in color grading. How important is it, do you think, to actually have experience as supervisors doing some of the jobs that you're supervising?
I think it's really important. Look, I would never say that you couldn't be a really good post supervisor without being an editor or a colorist, but I think those things are incredibly helpful. To me, kind of the minimum is a competent editor, but I think a good editor, a good colorist will make a good post supervisor. Somebody who's those things, who really understands and cares about production. And having done the job isn't just about having the technical knowledge, but it's about sort of like understanding emotionally what your responsibilities are and how to communicate with certain kinds of people. How do producers work, and what are the expectations of colorists, and how to deal with a really demanding and maybe fussy editor, things along those lines. So having done the work sort of prepares you for that as well.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think I definitely know people who haven't done the work and have come from more of like the production route, who are very good and totally capable. But I think it does help, particularly like when dealing with artists, to understand what they're going through, to know that like this kind of note always makes you angry. So be nice when you deliver it, even if you have to. I think one anecdote that relates to this. Actually, the first company I worked for, Square, half the staff were Japanese and didn't speak English well enough to be professional. So all of our coordinators were translators. And because of the technical nature of what we were doing, there were a lot of terms that they didn't know if they were translatable or just something they didn't know. So all the coordinators started doing software tutorials in Maya and Photoshop and other tools we used. And they were some of the best coordinators I worked with because they understood like the basics of the tools and the workflow that we were going through.
It's interesting. I was also wondering, like, along the lines of knowing the skills that you're supervising for, how would you say either of you got involved in supervision, as far as like, what is the transition like from, either if you're an artist of some sort in VFX or if you're an editor, what kind of transition do you do to become a post supervisor? And like, what skills, you talked about communication, but are there any certain skills you think are important to train in, if that's something you want to do as well?
Yeah, I came to it through the work itself, right? As a colorist, and I'll tell you, some of it was, and this is gonna sound maybe slightly arrogant, but I dealt with enough post supervisors that really didn't know that much, because they hadn't worked as artists at some place in the post pipeline. And some of it was just out of necessity. I'd work on, a smaller, say, feature or whatever. And if the choice was to turn it over to, by necessity, lowly paid post soup, or for me to sort of expand my colorist job into being post soup, then I'd do that. And I was asked by a number of producers and directors along the way, or they would basically just tell me, hey, we really want you to work on this. And by the way, you need a post soup because we know you can do that, kind of thing. So that's how I came into it. And in terms of preparing for it, I mean, I think like a lot of this stuff, as Carl was saying before, it's that so much of it is communication, right? it really is, and understanding where people are emotionally. I haven't done sort of in the trenches VFX work for a number of years, but I really feel for, the compositors and roto artists. I mean, the deadlines and the pressures and the long hours are really, really difficult. And, the VFX industry in particular is always sort of between a rock and a hard place, being asked to do impossible things. I mean, Carl, this is, you could speak to this, I'm sure, extensively. But all that to say that as a supervisor, I'm sure that you're bearing the brunt of at least some of the, how taxing this must be emotionally for VFX artists. And as a super, I would imagine you need to be able to help out with that.
Yeah, definitely. There is a bit of a, therapist side of supervising of, understanding when, okay, this artist we've loaded up with way too much hard stuff. Let's spread the paint around a bit, and just trying to get ahead of schedules as much as possible, knowing how these things end up. And warning the artists sometimes when it's like, hey, things are getting busy, so don't make plans next week, that kind of stuff.
I hate getting those emails. Yeah. So one topic that Grace and I really want to talk about, and I think we want to have like an entire panel talk eventually about this, because it's something that we feel strongly about and we're curious what other people think about it. But we both went to school for what we're doing now. And I don't think personally, I would say that you have to go to film school to be a filmmaker. But obviously, like the work that you guys do, there are specific software that you need to know, and there are skills that you need to have. So I'm curious, did you both go to school for what you're doing now? And do you think you have to? And if not, what are some other resources that people can use to get these skills?
It's a super interesting question. I think it's never been more sort of like important right now, during the pandemic and just sort of in the age of virtual learning. I didn't go to film school. I went to a liberal arts university, and but I was very interested in film. I was a film theory major, and they didn't have a filmmaking program at my school, so I took a film production class as a sort of like extension program, and I met a really talented director, DP, who mentored me, and he ended up getting me my first jobs and video assist and a lot of stuff in post, and I sort of went from there. With the price of admission at so many film schools being so crazy high, I've taught at SVA, the School of Visual Arts here in New York, for many years, and their computer animation visual effects program is really second to none, and Carl will know many graduates that come from there. I taught in that program for many years, but I'll tell you, at the cost of admission for that, I mean, I would not have been able to. My parents would not have been able to afford it back in the day. I mean, it's really astronomical, and as everyone will know as well, the NYU film program it's crazy. Look, I've worked with a lot of very talented people, some of which went to film school, others didn't. To my mind, having taught in film schools including Fierstein, where I met Grace and Lily, for the last 20 years, I think the most valuable thing about film school is not learning software, is maybe not even working on sort of technical skills per se at all. It's being in a cohort of other filmmakers and working on projects with them. Right? That's invaluable, and that's real experience. It applied in hopefully a really good learning environment. And I think, for instance, Fierstein, and let me put in a plug for Fierstein. It's a really, really wonderful program. It's a CUNY program. It's not very expensive, and that's the exception out there in film schools. I think if you
I will say though, when you talk about programs, learning programs, it was nice to be forced to learn Avid, because Avid can be, it's difficult. It's difficult.
It's not
Right.
intuitive. Yeah,
Right.
It is really the kind of thing where you need lessons. You need to like watch tutorials or have someone teach you. Yeah.
Well, but there's a wealth of tutorials out there, right, that are online, and for my money or for free online, sitting at your own pace and watching a video and going along, you're going to learn. I think you can learn just as effectively, but you're not going to get the benefit of the human interaction, your cohort, and the experience of the direct interaction with the professor, right? So that's, I guess, what film school can give you. But I'm shocked and amazed at how much good stuff is online these days. I really don't think one is a substitute for another. In fact, in my color grading classes at Feuerstein, I give a whole online course in Davinci Resolve, because I don't want to take precious class time just telling you where the buttons are. I want to work with you on your projects and on my projects, on our projects, together in real time, because I just think that's more valuable in person. And then on your own time, you can sit and watch and figure out where the buttons are.
Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah, I also did not study visual effects. I have a BFA in industrial design, which is how I got into computer modeling, and then from there into environment modeling and everything else. But it was a similar situation that, the professor wasn't really teaching us the software. She was teaching us how to be better artists. And all of us in the class who were dedicated would, figure out how to do something specific and then share it with each other. Hey, I need to learn how to, do a proper arm rig, or I need to learn how to do a, fluid simulation. And I was just working, at 3 a.m, in this, room full of supercomputers that we only had access to after hours, because it was also like a research laboratory. That, late night coffee, trying to figure stuff out and working together was definitely a big learning help.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
it definitely helps to go through it with other people who are, in the same boat as you, and to develop, these friendships with people that are like coming up with you can be really helpful for sure.
Well, can I ask you, Grace and Lily, like, how much have you had an opportunity to work? I mean, besides with each other, I know you guys work together, but have you had an opportunity to work with other people in your cohort at Feuerstein since you graduated?
Since we graduated, we work 12-hour days, so we don't have time for anything else.
I have a little bit. I've done a couple like little things with some of the directors and producers that I knew, and we definitely like keep in touch and still talk, and I'm interested in what they're doing. So it's a growing thing, I think, because everyone's still also coming up in their own way. We're all at like different stages of our careers. So like 10 years down the road, like who knows where knowing a certain person, could get you into all kinds of things. Like they might be doing a film and they want you to come on because, you guys have a good repertoire. So it's definitely a big positive. But as far as, learning programs, you're definitely right. There's like a lot of great resources on the internet now. It's all about self-discipline, because when you are paying for it and you're forced to go to class, I will say it does change how well you're gonna sit there and learn. Because when you're just at home and in front of your computer, it's very easy to just turn off the internet and then go play a video game instead. So, but it just depends on the kind of person you are. That's all I think.
Totally. The hybrid model, and I find myself in this situation sometimes, is when you need to know something by a certain time for a job. So then you brush up on that. I just did like a deep dive into HDR because I have an HDR job coming up, so I'm very, very interested in HDR, but there's a whole aspect of it where it's like, yeah, no, I'd rather play a video game or listen to a podcast. I got the HDR tutorial through Mixing Light, which is an online resource for post-production, especially color grading, which has a lot of really great online tutorials.
There are a lot of really great. I know like Linda is the one that a lot of people know, but it's not free. But
No,
there's
Linda's
a lot of
free
really.
in your library. If you have a library card, you can use
I don't
Linda
have
for
a library
free.
card, but everyone
Go
in
to
New
the
York should have a library
library.
card.
A library card is free.
Yeah, my wife
Yeah.
is at the library like constantly these days, and it brings home amazing. I'm like, what? You can get all this stuff at the public library? It's,
So what are some
Who
more
knew?
free resources? So if you have a library card, Linda's free. Mixing Light is great. There's a No Film School. I write for No Film School, so that's a little plug, but No Film School is great. Premium Beat. What else? Like I know we talked about there's some really awesome New York-based like film collectives. And now we're one of them. So we're going to start spreading that information too. But there's also like the New York Post Alliance, Blue Collar Post Collective. What else? Do you guys know any other? Some great resources?
either, and it's not local, but FXPhD, which has some free stuff, I think is phenomenal. They do really great stuff, tutorials, not free. And sometimes, although they have a subscription system, which makes their stuff almost a bargain, I think they're a great resource.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think a lot of companies I've worked for have had like a company account, and they just give that to artists if they want to use it offline or on their break, something like that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So people need to learn the VFX skills. They need to start watching tutorials and practicing and doing it. And then we also talked about how a lot of it is, as we know, who you know. And once you get a job, usually you can just keep getting jobs because you do a great job and then people refer you. But if you don't know where to start, where can people start? I know, Carl, we talked earlier this week and you mentioned something that I didn't know, which is that there's a way into VFX through PAing.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about kind of like entry level, like how do people get into it?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with a couple of guys who are PAs who got like assigned to a VFX unit for like shooting plates and taking measurements, stuff like that. And through that, kind of specialized in being a VFX PA or what we sometimes refer to as a data wrangler. So somebody who collects all the camera data and any other reports and does that particularly if it's a complex job and the supervisor needs to be watching the monitors and dealing with the directors, and doesn't have time, or if you've got, like this person in particular, I think started off on one of the Spider-Man films. And so when they're shooting in Times Square, you've got cameras that are blocks away from each other. So you need to have multiple people who can follow those around and make sure they get all the data. And that guy in particular, has gone on. He was a data wrangler for me and the coordinator for me, and then kind of like a junior VFX supervisor, and now has his own show. So it is a way.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
And then if
What
you're
about-
wanting to oh, sorry, Lily.
No,
if you're
ahead.
wanting to find one of these like PA jobs that you're talking about, what's a good resource to find something like that? Or would you start to look?
I honestly don't know how PAs get started, since I didn't personally go that route. Jerome might have more
Fair enough.
information.
There are. That's a really good question. I mean, these days, I don't really know how you get a PA job. I mean, often actually through film schools or film programs or answering ads. I know that, people put up ads to work on films. I think the best thing you can do is get on a production for free in any capacity that you can. If you're literally starting from nowhere, get on a film or make your own film. I know so many people who basically got into film from just doing their first project. And I worked on a feature doc a couple of years ago, and both filmmakers, a producer, director / editor, had never done anything before, and they were just passionate about music. They both had a background in music critics. They'd worked for Vice and various interesting things, but nothing in filmmaking. And they decided they wanted to make a doc about this very influential Swedish band from the early 2000s. And they made a fantastic movie. cut it themselves, learn all of the skills, and I mean, seeing it, you would never guess it was a first feature, much less a first project of any kind. So obviously, not everybody has the wherewithal, finances to generate their own project. But if you can get on the project and see what you like to do and offer your help and sort of take it from there. In terms of color grading, a lot of people come to color grading via other jobs in post, like assistant editing, I even post supervising. But AE and editor are a pretty common route to, or VFX to color grading, I've found.
I also know, when it comes to some of the lower level positions, Facebook groups are really popular. I'm part of a lot of these different Facebook groups, especially when I was a student. Like NYC filmmakers is a nice one. There's a ton if you just like literally Facebook search like filmmakers, and there's people putting out all kinds of jobs, and some of them you might have to work for free, and then eventually you get to know people through these things. So there's a lot of good resources on the internet and social media in particular that I think people would be surprised that there's a lot out there for sure.
That's a good point, and that reminds me, I'm a member of the Video Consortium, which is New York-based, LA-based. I think they have a London office. They're a worldwide consortium of nonfiction filmmakers. So it's all doc, nonfiction, editorial stuff, and they have a really active Facebook presence, and there's jobs on there all the time.
That's good to know.
Yeah, it's a good resource.
The New York Post Alliance also, they're not a free group, but I think it's like $50 a year or something. That could be totally wrong. Maybe if you're a student,
I think it's $50 if you're like sponsored by somebody else. So if you got to know somebody, and then you just like put their email in.
Right. Yeah.
Not a member.
But they post, they send out emails, I think like once every 3 months or so, that actually lists all of the current productions that are in post in New York City at that time. And then, so I know, like Grace and I know someone who just started harassing people pretty much, like from that list, just started like seeking out the post soups.
You gotta harass people. That's the hot tip.
That's the key. You can't be scared to harass people in this industry, especially post people. Post people want to help. It's,
Right.
No, it's true. Editors want to talk to you. No one wants to talk to them. So go talk to them because they want to talk to people. They're in their dark rooms all day long. I get it. And they're so interesting. I love post people. They're great. They have so many nice stories to tell.
Well, that's a great resource too, because you can see what the subject matter is too, right? Something you're really interested in. And I had a friend who worked at Criterion years ago, and he mentioned that a Godard film was coming through there, and I had done another film for them already, and I was like, I have to be. This is one of my favorite films of all time. I gotta, and I got the job. It was one of those. It was one of those right place, right time, but it was mostly just a squeaky wheel kind of thing. I was like, hey, I gotta do this job. Godard. How can I not do it?
Yeah, I think I maybe mentioned the Visual Effects Society, which is like a global professional group that does have dues, and you do have to have experience to get in. But particularly the New York chapter is pretty active on having like mixers and pub nights and stuff like that are open to everyone. Members just get a couple drink tickets. So I've definitely met a lot of students and juniors at those places that are looking for their foot in the door. And I'm happy to, take their demo reel or whatever and give them some advice. While we're still on the topic of like getting started, I would also say that a lot of the larger VFX facilities do have internship programs or some call runner system, which is kind of a PA for a post facility.
Yep.
That can often be a good way to kind of like get in there and see how things work. And see where you're going to fit, what role you want to do. Particularly a company I used to work for, they would hire what we call render wranglers who watch the render farm and make sure shots go through and fix errors, all that kind of stuff. Sometimes overnight, and their program, it was a normal paid position, but once you knew kind of like what role you wanted to do, they'd start kicking you some of the work that wasn't super time sensitive, just to see how they do. And after a year, they would have a chance to try to jump into that role.
That's really cool. And so some of those big post houses and VFX houses do post job openings on their sites. Mm-hmm. Some of the bigger ones, but some of the smaller ones that don't have like producer contact information on their websites, and you can just cold email. I mean, that's what Grace and I did. That's what we did. We just cold emailed and we got jobs.
It's true. It's part of it. I did want to ask a question about how, we're all in quarantine, at least we should be, and at home right now, and we're all working. And I know, being an assist has changed quite a lot through this like remote work. So I'm curious to know, how has supervising in either VFX or post-supervising, or even like being a colorist, how's that changed for you during this time when you're working remote? Like, how different is it?
Well, I recently, back in October, did an on-site supervising job in Philadelphia for a TV show, and they actually had it as a bubble production. And so they rented out an entire apartment complex that was just for crew. Drove down there, got tested, went to a hotel, came back, got tested again. I was allowed to enter the apartment complex, and then asked to not have any contact outside of the complex and the stages. So that was an interesting month.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a show that had been shooting when COVID hit, so they only had like 3 or 4 episodes left.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Things have changed substantially for me. I've only done 2, 3 jobs that were not remote where I went on site, and it was pretty. But even then, we set up a grading suite so that the client monitors for the grading suite were in a different room outside of the grading suite, and we were basically shouting at each other through the open door with fans, and
oh my god,
masks on the whole time. So it was kind of like half remote. We were in the physically same place, but yeah, otherwise I've been at home. I'm lucky enough that I have a very decent tricked out color suite. A studio in my house. We have a duplex, and it's downstairs. So I was already having clients here to work on stuff. So I didn't have to make any transition working remotely that way, because I have everything I need here. Nice production monitor and control surface, all of that. But not having any supervised or very little supervised work in real time per se has been really, really different. One thing that I've done I did it on one project a lot, was use the Davinci Resolve remote, the Blackmagic Davinci Resolve remote, where you can actually, and it's really incredible what you're doing now. It's only being expanded in version 17, which just came out. Where you can basically control somebody else's Resolve system entirely. And it works not by sending media over the internet, but by only sending the commands to control the media that they have locally. So that means that you can work on really anything. And in fact, the client could have proxy media, and you could have the full res media, and they're seeing everything that you're doing in real time at whatever quality they're able to show it. So I was working with a DP in Ireland, and he's got a Mac laptop with ProRes proxy. And, I'm working at home on the full 4K RAW, but we're seeing the same thing at the same time. And so every adjustment I make makes the adjustment on his system, and he was actually seeing it through a production monitor, but just attached to his laptop. And then we're just talking on the phone. And I mean, he and I have worked on a million things together, so that makes that easier. But I'm actually looking forward to doing more of that. I mean, there's no substitute for working in person, but that way of working is better than asynchronous remote. You know, like working from home in certain situations is great and maybe even desirable, but in a lot of situations, it's like, as you both know, Lily and Grace, and I'm sure Carl as well, if you're not able to react synchronously in real time to stuff, you spend so much time going back and forth, and you know, talking about images is like dancing about architecture, as they say. So.
It's interesting because it really is difficult. Even when you do have, I mean, on the phone, like that's great. You still get like the verbal response, but you can't also control, you know, where they're viewing it. Unlike like we work in commercials and we would have, you know, clients come into the room and watch it from there, and you get, you know, also their body language. It's just, it's fascinating, like what changes now when we're all remote and what you have to adjust for, because you also just get different notes because we're in this environment now.
Yeah, it really is different, and the controlling the image is not a small part of it, right? I mean, especially for the kind of work that we do. Well, I mean, color probably more than anything, but you don't know what people are seeing, and that's tough enough under normal circumstances than under these circumstances.
People are watching on their iPhones and they're like, Jerome, it doesn't look right.
A day doesn't go by where I don't hear it. Is it going to look right on? Is it going to look right on this person's iPhone? It's like, well, I'm just going to say no because maybe it will, but
we all hope, you know, we do our best.
Yeah, we hope. Maybe if you say a prayer, it will look great on their iPhone.
I do want to add, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I once had a director who was going to Comic-Con while reviewing, so we had to transcode everything to go through Vimeo on his iPad. We're like, this is not going to work well.
Reviewing dailies on Vimeo.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
It has forced me to, Netflix has a remote process for evaluating color critical stuff that involves an iPad Pro and a couple of other things. That actually is, that I've adopted. I sort of did a few things to it to make it, well, I think better. But if you have this process in place, you can actually review color critical stuff asynchronously pretty well. And that's been great for me, because even post-pandemic, to the extent that we're doing color critical stuff that's not synchronous, I'm going to use this process. And spending a few hours, a few days working it out, and then actually using it on a couple of big shows has been really, really valuable for me in general.
I wanted to mention, since you brought up Resolve, and although Blackmagic Design is our sponsor, like these panels are not supposed to be about Blackmagic Design products, but I think it is really important, since we talked about accessibility and the idea that people can, if they want to get started and don't know how, they can make something. And a resource for that is Resolve, because Resolve has a free version that you can download for Windows, Mac, or Linux. And it pretty much does everything that the paid version does, except for some noise reduction and maybe DCP, or maybe that isn't integrated now, but
4K and a few other small things. But yeah, it does basically do everything.
Right, and there are tutorials for Resolve on YouTube. So I mean, for people who want, and if you don't know about Resolve, Resolve does media management, edit, audio edit. Fusion is the VFX editor, and then delivery, all out of the same platform. So it is a really great tool for learning how to do all of these different things and learn these skills if you don't want to pay for the software or go to school to learn the software.
True. Any editor, anybody involved in post whatsoever, should have Resolve free at their fingertips. It really is an extraordinary tool, and it does all of these things, and it does almost all of those things incredibly well too, which is really saying something. I'm a fan in terms of color grading of some other tools as well, including Assimilate Scratch, which I think is really extraordinary and fairly inexpensive, but nothing that I know of is free and that powerful. It's just it's
For sure. It's impressive to me also how well written their like learning guides are, which you can also download for free, the PDFs for their textbooks. They're really well done, and you can download the media. And so if you're just learning right along with the book, like it's great. I've used them to both teach and to learn, and it's awesome.
The best manual in the industry.
Yeah.
If you ever really awesome. For anything else, I mean, manuals are terrible.
Yeah.
The Resolve manual is amazing. Everything is in there. Yeah, it's very cool.
This really is not a Resolve commercial. It really
sounds like a little bit fun. I mean, when we're talking about resources, like I do think it's a valuable resource. Carl, I wanted to ask you about, you talked about working in video games, and I was curious, what was the transition like for you, especially for people that maybe are in a different industry and are interested in transitioning to, film and television? Like, why did you transition, and what was that like for you?
I kind of did it twice. So the first time it was pretty easy because as an asset artist, building an asset is building an asset, whether it's for a game or a movie or a commercial. Particularly because the assets I was building were full environments that then were like rendered out as stills and used in the game. So I wasn't really involved in any of the like resource usage and polygon limits and stuff like that. I went from that then to an animated feature and then into commercials. And so those skills all transferred pretty quickly and easily. When I went back to games as a supervisor, it was a little bit different because there's a lot of the same skills just used differently and managed differently. I'd come from commercials, which, as you guys know, can be, as quick as like a 2-day turnaround on things, or even hours, depending on the spot. Whereas games, have these like year or 2 year long schedules where you kind of know, like, okay, this is the prep time, or designing things to figure out our pipeline and how we're going to manage stuff, and this is where we're starting to get the game together. And then we know like this last 3 months or 6 months is going to be just really heavy crunch time getting it all together and ironing out the bugs. So it's a different sense of management and how you deal with what the art is, and how you're managing your people, stuff like that. And also I dealt a lot with outsourcing when I was there. So when we were sending assets to other vendors to create based on our designs, and dealing with getting those things like in and out of the pipeline, it was a new challenge. But because I've done also a bunch of work just writing code for VFX pipelines, that was a good fit for me to have automate some of that stuff, but also deal with the art direction side of it.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I love the idea that you can move from one kind of content to another and the skills will transfer. Because I mean, it's interesting when you're an editor or, even a colorist, like sometimes you get shafted depending on what you're doing into certain kind of content. So did you ever get the question of like, can you even do this? If you worked in video games, can you work in commercials? Like, was there ever that issue for people hiring?
It depends on what your skill set is. Some skills are transferable, some aren't. Someone who's a level designer is probably not going to work in commercials. Maybe in like film, doing like large environment layouts and stuff like that. Game producers are generally pretty specific to, putting together the flow of a game and stuff like that. But we did have a couple editors who had come from cutting skate videos, and they were because cool. It was but they were cutting together our cinematics and some of like the pre pre-built cutscenes of interacting with specific characters.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting as because video games do get closer now to movies in a lot of ways. So I imagine, especially as an editor or whatever it is, like it becomes more transferable basically when it's not just like a Pong. So it's interesting. It's cool.
Versa, right? Movies are becoming more like video games.
That's probably more correct. Yeah. I have friends who are working in virtual production, which is all Unreal Engine driven on set, visual and stuff like that.
So unless we have any audience questions, do you guys want to wrap up with some like final advice for people who want to do what you do? Just like anything that you can say to help out people who want to be you.
Carl, you want to go?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, one thing I always tell students or junior people who are starting to get into it, because in VFX, it's really all about your demo reel. That's all I really look at. And one piece of advice I got when I was getting started that always struck home with me was, your reel's gonna be judged by the worst piece on there. So if you've got something that you're sentimental about because it was the first time you did color grading or the first time you did a simulation, but isn't really, demonstrative of your skills, get it out of there. Don't worry about padding out your reel to be, 2 minutes long. If it's 45 seconds, it's great work, then I'll hire you. But I know that when I was getting started, I was like, oh, well, I really like this character animation I did. I got to get it on there. But it's really not that good.
That's really good advice. Yeah. Demo reels.
Yeah, I guess I'd say that the communication, the social aspect is incredibly important. And I think the more that you can reach out to people, talk with people. I mean, filmmaking is a collective medium, and we work together, even in pandemic times, virtually, remotely. We're still working together. And at the end of the day, people want to work with people who have each other's backs, who care about each other, who are nice to each other, are respectful to each other. That stuff is really, really important. And I think as our kind of social landscape has been evolving, I use that as a way of saying maybe indirectly our concepts about race and sexuality and gender, all those are finally getting to a point where maybe we can treat everybody with respect. It's like extra super duper important to demonstrate your humanity and communicate in a way that acknowledges other people's humanity. So I think socializing and communicating is often, especially maybe in post-production where we're all a little bit nerdier and a little bit more autistic, it's sort of like extra important to make an effort to communicate and see each other.
Yeah, no, that's, I feel like definitely like a huge skill that we all need to embrace for sure. Communication.
Yeah.
It comes more
get into it.
It does that, right? And I think that's one of the changes in post-production that has been one of the best things that's happened in the last few years. A lot more women coming in, still not enough, but it's really transforming the industry and making it better because women are just naturally better communicators and just naturally more emotionally intelligent.
I agree.
So, yeah, progress.
That's a fact. That's a fact.
It is a fact.
I mean, I'd say I feel that I spend like at least half my day with a video chat to multiple people open on a separate screen. So even though we're isolated, we're still talking all day long, and still communicating. Totally.
Yeah, the really long Zoom calls are important but tiring.
It's exhausting.
And exhausting.
Well,
thank you guys.
I was just going to, I mean, when I was working in Pipeline, I was working at a company that had offices all over the world, and trying to get us all on the same page technically was difficult. We found that enforcing video calls made people communicate a lot better because seeing somebody will make you pay attention a lot more. Whereas if you just have a speakerphone on, it's easy to ignore somebody and just keep working on your code or whatever.
That's true. People will see you ignoring them.
Exactly.
Call you out for it.
You also see me eating a sandwich, so.
Right. Well, this has been really awesome. You guys are so awesome. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us. And thank you to the audience for watching. This was our first New York City panel talk. So thanks for coming. And we're going to do more of these. So keep an eye out for the next ones. If you haven't signed up for the newsletter, definitely sign up for the newsletter on the Blackmagic Collective website. Also, don't forget to submit your 5-minute or less short films to the Blackmagic Collective Film Festival. It's free to submit. And as Jen mentioned, there are awesome prizes. So there's no reason not to. So thank you guys so much. We'll see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for putting this together. It was great.